Today we're uncovering 10 Black history facts that are barely known in the modern world. So sit back, relax, and hold tight, because something truly unique is coming your way. Before Rosa Parks, there was Claudette Colvin. Most people, including you, think of Rosa Parks as the first person to refuse to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. But several women came before her. One of them was Claudette Colvin. On March 2, 1955, a 15-year-old schoolgirl refused to move to the back of the bus. This act of defiance happened 9 months before Rosa Parks stanned the incident that launched the Montgomery bus boycott. Claudette had been studying Black leaders like Harriet Tubman in her segregated school. Those conversations led to deeper discussions about the Jim Crow laws her community was living under every single day. When the bus driver ordered her to get up, she refused. Claudette later said, "It felt like Sojourner Truth was on one side pushing me down, and Harriet Tubman was on the other side pushing me down. I couldn't get up." Her stand didn't stop there. She was arrested, thrown in jail, and became one of 4 women who challenged segregation laws in court. The case Browder v. Gale successfully overturned bus segregation laws in both Montgomery and the state of Alabama. So why has Claudette's story been largely forgotten? At the time, the NAACP and other Black organizations felt Rosa Parks made a better icon for the movement. As a mature adult with the right image, Parks was the NAACP secretary, well-known, respected, and seen as someone who would attract middle-class support for the cause. But the truth is, the struggle to end segregation was often fought by young people, more than half of whom were women. The courage of Claudette Colvin has become just another forgotten story, but she deserves tribute. You can read her story in her book, Twice Towards Justice. Martin Luther King Jr. improvised the most iconic part of his speech. It sounds impossible, but it's absolutely true. On Wednesday, August 28, 1963, 250,000 Americans gathered at the Lincoln Memorial for the March on Washington. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the final speaker, and at a certain moment, he pushed his notes aside. Dr. King had worked on his speech with a small group of advisors at the Willard Hotel. According to advisor Clarence B. Jones, the original speech was more political and less poetic. It contained no references to dreams. After delivering the now famous line, "No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream," something shifted. Gospel legend Mahalia Jackson, who was standing near the podium, reportedly kept calling out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." Whether he heard her or not, something clicked. Dr. King set aside his prepared text and began to preach using the anaphoric repetition of a Baptist sermon, outlining his dream for America. "I still have a dream." 8. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. No one from the authorities was fully prepared for this moment. Even earlier discussions had floated, delivering the speech as a sermon, but nothing was fixed. On that hot August day in 1963, honesty and emotion ruled the stage. Though not considered an immediate universal success, the speech is now recognized as one of the greatest in American history. Inoculation was introduced to America by an enslaved African. Few details are known about the early life of Onesimus, but historians believe he was born in Africa in the late 17th century before being brought to Boston. One of thousands of African descendants living in the Massachusetts colony, in 1706, Onesimus was given as a gift to the Puritan minister Cotton Mather by his congregation. Onesimus told Mather about a century-old African tradition of inoculation, extracting material from an infected person and scratching it into the skin of a healthy individual, deliberately introducing smallpox to build immunity. He described having had this done to him in Africa, saying people take a juice of smallpox and cut the skin and put in a drop, when a smallpox epidemic hit. Boston in 1721, Cotton Mather convinced Dr. Zabdiel Boylston to experiment with the procedure. Over 240 people were inoculated. Despite fierce political, religious, and medical opposition, even threats on Mather's life, the results spoke for themselves. 2% of inoculated patients died, minus 15% of uninoculated people who contracted smallpox died. Onesimus's African practice was later used to inoculate American soldiers during the Revolutionary War and introduced the concept of inoculation to the entire United States. Yet for centuries, Boylston's tomb incorrectly credited him as the pioneer. It wasn't until 2016 that medical science formally acknowledged Smith's contribution. He was named among Boston Magazine's 100 Greatest Bostonians of All Time. As historian Ted Widmer of CUNY noted, Smith had far more medical knowledge than most Europeans in Boston at the time. The earliest recorded protest against slavery was by the Quakers in 1688. The Quakers, also known as the Society of Friends, have a long and powerful history of abolitionism. In 1688, a young German attorney named Francis Daniel Pastorius and 3 other Quakers living in Germantown, Pennsylvania, drafted the first formal protest against slavery in American history. On behalf of the Germantown meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, they brought the issue of slavery before their Quaker assembly. They saw the slave trade as a grave injustice and used the Golden Rule as their moral foundation, do unto others as you would have done unto you, arguing it applied regardless of skin color. In their protest they wrote, "Pray what things in the world can be done worse towards us than if men should rob or steal us away and sell us for slaves to strange countries, separating husbands from their wives and children." Their protest was presented at a monthly meeting in Dublin, Philadelphia. The meeting passed it along to a quarterly meeting, which passed it further up. It was presented at the Philadelphia yearly meeting, but it would take 88 more years before the Society of Friends officially denounced slavery. Over the centuries, this rare document was considered lost twice. Most recently, it was rediscovered in 2005 and is now housed at Haverford College Special Collections. Of 12.5 million Africans shipped to the New World, fewer than 388,000 arrived in the United States. In the late 15th century, advances in seafaring technology opened an Atlantic corridor that would change the world forever. As ships began connecting West Africa with Europe and the Americas, fortunes were sought and native populations were decimated. With indigenous labor dwindling and demand for plantation and mining workers growing, the transatlantic slave trade was born. From 1500 to 1866, more than 12 million enslaved Africans were shipped across the Atlantic. Of those, only 10.7 million survived the brutal Middle Passage. The largest destination, Brazil, receiving 4.9 million enslaved people, who faced incredibly high mortality rates due to horrific working conditions. Remarkably, Brazil was the last country in the world to ban slavery, 1888. By the time the United States became significantly involved in the slave trade, it had already been underway for 200 years. The majority of the 388,000 enslaved Africans who arrived in what would become the U.S. came between 1700 and 1866, a far smaller percentage of the global total than most Americans realize. HBCUs have a surprising shared history with Jewish academics. When it comes to the pursuit of civil rights, the Jewish and African American communities share a chapter of history that is rarely discussed. In the 1930s, when Jewish academics from Germany and Austria were dismissed from their university positions under Nazi rule, many fled to the United States seeking work. But due to the Great Depression, rampant xenophobia, and rising anti-Semitism, mainstream American universities largely shut their doors. More than 50 Jewish scholars found positions at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities in the segregated South. The first HBCU, Cheyney University of Pennsylvania, had been established in 1837 to educate formerly enslaved Africans. By the time these Jewish professors arrived, the number of HBCUs had grown to 78 because both communities knew persecution firsthand. Jewish professors found these black institutions welcoming and intellectually alive. They often created special programs facilitating meaningful conversations between black and white Americans, sometimes for the very first time. In the years that followed, the interests of the two communities increasingly diverged. But this shared experience of discrimination and interracial cooperation remains a vital thread in the fabric of the civil rights movement. 1 in 4 cowboys was black. Despite what popular books and Hollywood movies have told you, the Wild West looked very different from what's on screen. And here's the biggest shock. The man believed to have inspired the Lone Ranger was an African American named Bass Reeves. Reeves was born into slavery but escaped west during the Civil War, living in what was then known as Indian Territory. He eventually became a deputy U.S. Marshall was a master of disguise, an expert marksman, had a Native American companion, and rode a silver horse. Sound familiar? After the Civil War, freedmen headed west, hoping for better lives where demand for skilled labor was high. These African Americans made up at least 1/4 of the legendary cowboy workforce. They lived dangerous lives, facing harsh weather, rattlesnakes, and outlaws, driving cattle herds to market under the open stars. While there was relatively little formal segregation on the frontier, black cowboys were typically expected to do the hardest, most dangerous work, breaking horses and being the first to cross flooded streams during cattle drives. Loyalty did develop among cowboys on a drive, but the contributions of black cowboys were systematically erased from the narrative. In fact, it is believed the very word cowboy originated as a derogatory term used to describe black cowhands. Esther Jones was the real Betty Boop. You may be wondering, who is Esther Jones, and what does she have to do with one of animation's most iconic characters? The beloved cartoon character Betty Boop, introduced by cartoonist Max Fleischer in 1930, was inspired by a black jazz singer from Harlem. The flapper character became animation's first and most famous sex symbol, known for her revealing dress, curvy figure, and distinctive childlike vocal style. That vocal style? It came from Esther Jones, known by her stage name Baby Esther, who performed regularly at the Cotton Club during the 1920s. Baby Esther's trademark style, using asterisk, boop-boop-a-doop asterisk, sounds and other childlike scat vocalizations, was utterly original. A white singer named Helen Kane witnessed one of Baby Esther's performances in the late 1920s, adopted her style entirely, and found fame doing so. When Betty Boop debuted, Kane sued Fleischer and Paramount, claiming they had stolen her asterisk image and style. But then video evidence surfaced of Baby Esther performing in a nightclub. The court ruled against Helen Kane, finding that she did not have exclusive rights to the style because it had predated her entirely. Baby Esther died in relative obscurity, but a piece of her lives on, forever animated, in the iconic figure of Betty Boop. The first licensed black female pilot was Bessie Coleman, born in Atlanta, Texas, in 1892. Bessie Coleman grew up in crushing poverty, facing both racial discrimination and gender barriers at every turn. She moved to Chicago at 23, hoping for opportunity, and found precious little. It was the stories of World War I pilots returning from Europe that first ignited her passion for flying. But in America, she faced a double stigma, being both black and a woman. No American flight school would accept her, so Bessie Coleman did the extraordinary. She taught herself French, crossed the Atlantic with her life savings and financial support from Robert Abbott, one of America's first black millionaires, and enrolled in aviation school in France. In June 1921, the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale awarded her an international pilot's license, making her the first licensed black female pilot in the world. Back in the United States, Coleman performed at air shows across the country, thrilling crowds with daring stunts, refusing to perform at venues that excluded black audiences, and actively encouraging African Americans to pursue aviation. In February 1923, her engine failed mid-flight. She survived a crash that left her with a broken leg, cracked ribs, and facial lacerations. She healed and went right back to the skies. On April 30, 1926, during a test flight, a loose wrench became lodged in the aircraft's engine. The pilot lost control. The plane flipped. Coleman, who was not wearing a seatbelt, as was common then, was thrown from the open aircraft and died. At her funeral, the great journalist and civil rights advocate Ida B. Wells presided. An editorial in the Dallas Express read, "There is reason to believe that the general public did not completely sense the size of her contributions to the achievements of the race. Interracial marriage was banned in America in 1664 and not overturned until 1967. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the growing number of interracial marriages, known legally as miscegenation, alarmed colonial lawmakers. The first anti-miscegenation law was enacted in the colony of Maryland in 1664. Other colonies quickly followed. These unions were outlawed. Penalties for white people who entered into them included enslavement, exile, or imprisonment. Over the centuries, these laws grew, evolved, and spread, with attempts even made to amend the U.S. Constitution to ban interracial marriage nationwide. It took 300 years for the law to be struck down. In 1967, Richard Loving, a white man, and Mildred Jeter, a black woman, had been married in Washington, D.C. When they returned home to Virginia, were arrested and convicted of violating the state's anti-miscegenation law, each facing a year in prison. Their case went all the way to the Supreme Court, in the landmark ruling Loving v. Virginia. The Supreme Court unanimously found in their favor, declaring that laws prohibiting interracial marriage at the state and local level were unconstitutional. For the first time since 1664, marriage between the races was legal across the entire country. And yet in 2000, Alabama became the last state to officially remove an anti-miscegenation clause from its state constitution. The ban was unenforceable, but it was still their asterisk on the books for 33 years after Loving. There are many rebel lovers throughout history who never bowed to unjust laws. The Lovings are among the most powerful. That brings us to the end of today's video. In the comments section below, let us know which fact touched you the most. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Historian channel for future videos on incredible little-known history.